In this video, leveraging the ICE and AD integration, we can create and push down authorization profiles based on a set of conditions for the authenticating user and the computer that they came in on. Let's begin. A funny thing happened between this video and the previous one. I actually rebooted the ICE server, and what I failed to do is I failed to do a copy run start after I changed the DNS information on this ICE server. And so when I rebooted that new DNS server where I was pointing over to the Windows 2012 server, it wasn't saved because I did not save it. And let me tell you what, having good and correct DNS resolution in an integration between ICE and Active Directory is critical if we want it to work. The other thing I wanted to share with you about DNS is that when Active Directory and ICE are working together, as we're going to do in this video, and we're going to have ICE set up some authorization based on AD group membership, if we want to get those groups reflected and used in ICE, we need to make sure that DNS not only works, but we also need to make sure that besides just forward resolution, meaning what is the IP address of this name, like ice.nuglab.com, we also need to make sure that the reverse lookups are also set up, the pointer records. And so on this Windows 2012 server, I went in and manually added those reverse lookups as well, because I was having a lot of grief in not being able to see the groups of Active Directory over here on the ICE server, and it ended up being a DNS issue. I'd also recommend that if you're working in a lab with ICE and you have somebody on your team who's like an Active Directory guru, it might be a great idea to make sure you can contact that person, and if you get stuck on something Microsoft related, that you can refer to the AD expert to assist you with that. Another cool thing I wanted to demonstrate with you in this video is if we have a computer like this one that's already part of Active Directory. So we've joined the computer to Active Directory, and then when the user logs in, the user is being authenticated against the domain. I wanted to share with you that with EAP, we can do the authentication of the computer itself, that it is a member of the domain, as well as the user who's logging on to that computer. And instead of having two separate sessions to handle that, we can use the concept of EAP chaining, which we mentioned a couple videos ago, or we can set up one outside tunnel, like with EAP fast. And using that one outside tunnel, we can authenticate both the computer and the user. The other great thing about the integration of Active Directory and ICE is that when we start setting up authorization, which we're also going to do in this video, we could base that authorization based on group membership in Active Directory. So we have this user group called domain users in Active Directory, and we could set up authorization so that if a user is a member of domain users, then they'll get this authorization or these permissions. So here on our ICE server, we're going to log in as admin, supply our password, and I just wanted to remind you that after we set parameters at the command line, if we want those to be there in the startup config, next time this guy boots up, we'd want to do a copy from running config to startup config, just like on an iOS router or a switch. The other thing I did, let's do a show start, was that I also went back and I erred on the side of caution. And I put only the name server of the Windows 2012 server, because I wanted to make absolutely sure that the name resolution was happening correctly. If we go over to our Windows 2012 server, and we log in there, and we go to DNS, the way you get there, you can go to Tools, and from the drop down, go to DNS, and that brings up the DNS Manager. So here in DNS, I have our domain, nuglab.com. I've got the entry for ICE. I've got the entry for server 1, which is this 2012 server. And I've also got an entry for IT Bob PC. That's a PC that joined the domain. And if we go to the reverse lookup zones for 192.168.1, there I've got the reverse lookup for ice.nuglab.com as well as server1.nuglab.com. And the reason I'm sharing these details with you about the Microsoft side of it is because I'd love to save you the hours of time that I will never get back as I was trying to troubleshoot why the groups weren't coming over from Active Directory into ICE. The authentication was working fine, it's just the groups wouldn't come in. The other thing I'd love to share with you is on our client machine. This is Bob's PC. I created a new entry called class fast, which is simply using the EAP fast method for the authentication. And I want to share with you something. If we go to details for our network connections here and go to manage networks, you'll notice the wired one by default, we can't edit it or remove it from here. And this class fast also is not editable or removable from this menu. And that's because I created these using the profile editor. And what I wanted to point out, again, to save you a boatload of time, is that if you want to modify or change the default entry, for example, wired, one option for doing that is on the local computer. So we're on Bob's PC right here. I'm going to launch the Network Access Manager Profile Editor. And from here, notice it says Profile Untitled. Now that's perfectly fine, because if we go to Networks and we go to Wired and we click on Edit, we're now editing this connection information for the name Wired. So in your lab environment, if you wanted this wired entry to not require any authentication, here's what we do. With wired selected, we go to security level, click on open, and you'll notice over here on the right hand side, all of the other options regarding security went away. So then we could click on next down here or go to the connection type. And here we'd select either machine or user authentication. But because it's open authentication, it's not going to require any credentials to get access to the network. If we want that to apply to this computer, what we're going to do is click on File, click on Save or Save As, it won't matter. And once we click on Save, it's going to put it in this folder called New Config Files. Now here's the magic. We need to save this file as configuration.xml. And I err on the side of caution. Even though it will automatically put the XML on, I explicitly spell it out. And then once you name it configuration.xml and you click on Save, the magic is that it's going to take that configuration, for example, the wired entry, and if you created several others right there, it's going to convert those and start using those as your configuration for the PC that you're sitting on. So because my configuration is perfect at the moment, and I'm also remote desktop to this machine, I'm not going to change it, but that's how we would do it. And one other thing I wanted to share with you is that once that's done, to trigger it, for example, let's say you created 3 entries there in the profile editor, and you're still only seeing 2 here, you need to go ahead and use the drop down, select it again, which will cause a re-authentication. It also rereads in the new profile information. So whether you go back to the wired, if it was on wired, select wired again, and then once you go to the drop down, you'll see all of those entries that you created in the profile editor. So again, the magic is save it as configuration.xml. It'll save it temporarily, and then it will apply that to your current computer. And in the background, as I've been changing that back and forth, that's causing a re-authentication of that port, because every time I select the EAP fast connection, it's sending out a new EAP message for authentication. And the authenticator, the switch, is saying sure. And it re-authenticates the device hanging off of the port. So while we're sitting here at the switch, I've got a question for you. How would we see all the ports that are currently using authentication on this switch? And if you're saying, Keith, I know it's show authentication sessions, you would be absolutely correct. Excellent work. And at the moment, we only have one port, and that's gig 0/7. If you and I wanted to see the details regarding that authentication, we'd use that same command, show authentication session, and this time we'd tack on interface and then gig 0/7 to see the details for just that port. So the username is ITBob. The IP address that Bob's computer has at the moment is that's his MAC address. Now I also want to share with you something pretty darn cool, Between this video and the last video, I also joined this computer, Bob's computer, to the domain. And to do that, it was pretty simple. I went to Explorer, and there's several ways of doing this. I right-clicked on my computer. I went to Properties of the computer. And in this area right here, for the computer name, domain, and working settings, I clicked on this link called Change Settings. And this will vary a little bit based on the operating system that you're running. The concept is the same. We're going to join a computer as part of a working domain. So what I did was I clicked on Change Settings, and then I clicked on this button called Change. There's also a wizard if we click on this link right here, but I use this option called Change. And I changed the computer name to itbob-pc as the name of this computer that Bob's using. And I also put in the name of the domain I wanted to join, and I clicked on OK. Now that triggered a request saying, hey, you have some credentials of a user and a password that would have the authority to join this computer to the domain? I said, yes, I do. And I put in the administrator name and the administrator password. And a few moments later it said, ta-da! Welcome to the domain. Now, that's the clean version of how it should normally go. But what I experienced is that I had the Network Access Manager running, and as a result, I could join the domain. Again, I have DNS currently working, so everything was resolvable. But once I joined the computer to the domain, and then I tried to log on as a domain user, I got a message saying, no logon server available to process the login request. And it happened over and over and over again. I removed this PC from the domain, I put him back in, I tried it again and again and again, and it would not go. So it was about that point when I was going to call one of our Microsoft gurus here at CBT Nuggets, either James Conrad or Chris Ward, because those guys both know their Microsoft in and out. And I thought to myself, before I call them, let me try one last thing. Let me remove the Network Access Manager. So I uninstalled it, I did the reboot, I joined the domain, and I logged in with absolutely no problem whatsoever. Now, some people might think, oh, that's because you're about to call a Microsoft expert, and it was scared. Or it could have been that there was some kind of a major hiccup happening in logging on the first time with the Network Access Manager present. And then the great news is this. Once I had logged on as a user of the domain, ITBob specifically, and I verified that that was working okay on this Windows computer, I then reinstalled the Network Access Manager, and I have not had any problems logging in since. So what I'd recommend doing is if you're going to add a computer, a brand new one, to the domain, add it first, verify you can log on first, and then go ahead and put in the Network Access Manager if you'd like to save several hours. At least that was my experience with Windows 7 and the current version of Network Access Manager as of the date of this recording. So back at our switch, we know that the authentication is working. We have access via RDP to the Windows 7 computer that also verifies that we have connectivity in place. One other cool feature we might want to use is a forced reauthentication with a .1x re-authenticate, and then specify the interface that you want to reauthenticate. If you don't put on the interface, it'll just go ahead and force all of the ports to reauthenticate. So we'll press enter, and that reauthentication didn't take long. And now my next question is, where would we go in ICE to see the details of that authentication that just happened? Now if you're saying, Keith, that's easy. We'd go to Operations in the ICE interface. We go to Authentications, click on that hyperlink. We go into the details for our most recent authentication, which is ITBob. And if we scroll down a little bit here, it shows us the identity store that was used, which is 81, which represents our Active Directory. And if we continue scrolling down a little bit, under the section called Other Attributes with EAP chaining result, it said no chaining involved. So as a result, EAP chaining is not being used, and we're only authenticating the user of ITBob. However, check out this magic. If we go to Policy So under ICE, we have our operations, policy, and administration. Under policy, if we go down to the policy elements and select results, so our path is policy, policy elements, results, and if we go down to authentication and expand that and click on allowed protocols, so we have a single default allowed protocol service. Now to edit that or look at the details of that, we have a couple options. We could click on the hyperlink, or we could check it there and click on edit. Either way is going to show us the details. And in these default allowed protocols for authentication, if we don't want to allow some type of authentication, we can just remove the check. But the piece I wanted to share with you is this. Under EAP Fast, so in this section right here, there's a checkbox that says, do you want to enable EAP chaining? And if you and I want to enable EAP chaining, we need to check that box. The other thing we definitely want to do is scroll all the way to the bottom and click on Save. Otherwise, that checked box won't mean anything when we move away from the screen. So we want to make sure we save it. So I want to share with you what that is going to result in. Now that we're doing the chaining, we can do the authentication of Bob, the user, as well as his computer, because it's part of the domain. So just for a moment, let's go to Operations and Authentications. And here's our last authentication with Bob. It was 1950. I just want to make sure that you and I can differentiate that one from another one after we force a reauthentication. So we'll go back to the command line of the switch. We'll hit the up arrow key again, and we'll force a reauthentication on port gig 0/7. And it was successful. So if we go back and we click on refresh, there was our last one with the 1950 mark, and then we have two new ones, both at 1957 and change. And look at this. In the one that we had looked at previously, it just authenticated the user, but these latest ones are also authenticating the computer as well. So I just grabbed that bar and slid it over a little bit so we could read these. So we're authenticating the user, IT Bob, as well as the computer that's part of the domain. So if we go into the details for one of these most recent authentications, you'll notice that for the authentication, it includes the username as well as the computer. If we scroll down a little bit further to other attributes, it also indicates that we're using EAP chaining. And over here on the right hand side, it's also indicating as one of its many detailed steps that it was starting the EAP chaining process. And if we go down a little bit, it looked up the user in Active Directory. It also looked up the machine in Active Directory. And that's great. The next thing I'd like to do is walk you through how we can have ICE leverage the groups in Active Directory to make if-then statements. If this user is a member of this group in Active Directory, then we'll go ahead and apply some special authorization on that port where that user is coming in on. So to do that, we're going to go back to the ICE interface. We'll go to Administration, and because these Active Directory groups are part of an external identity source, we're going to go to the Identity Management section. We're going to go down to the External Identity Sources. This is just where we went when we integrated Active Directory. We'll click on that link. On the left-hand side for External Identity Sources, we'll go to Active Directory. And here's our identity store called AD1 using the domain nuglab.com that we integrated in the previous video. Now, building on our relationship that ICE has with Active Directory, we can now take a look at the groups and check for group membership in Active Directory. So to start the ball rolling with that, we're going to click on Groups. And as a reminder of where we're at Administration, Identity Management, External Identity Sources, Active Directory, and then with the object 81, which represents our Active Directory selected, we're going to the tab called Groups. And by default, there are no groups that are showing up here. But if we want to pick from or work with some groups, we can go ahead and use the drop down on the Add button. And we can use the option of Select Groups from Directory. Now, now what's going to happen if our DNS is correctly set up? If we click this Select Groups from Directory, it's going to give us the option of filtering. So we could say nuglab.com is the domain, that's true. And an asterisk says, please show me all the groups. Or if we wanted to see only groups that started with domain, or only the groups that started with A, we could go ahead and put an A and an asterisk, and it would show us only those groups starting with A. For our demonstration, let's just have it bring in everything. So it doesn't mean we have to use all the groups. It simply says I want to see the existing groups inside of Active Directory. So we'll click on this button called Retrieve Groups. And, and there they are. Oh my goodness, such a good sign to see all those groups flying in. And for me, it was the DNS issues that weren't all correctly set up, including the reverse lookups for both the ICE server as well as our domain controller. So you want to make sure those are both set up. So if we scroll down, we have this group called domain users. So we could go ahead and select that and click on OK. So now we have this group, this Active Directory group, that can be used to check whether we should give certain types of permissions to a user or not. And the beautiful thing about this is that once we have all of this set up in ICE, we don't have to go back to ICE to keep changing things. But instead, you and I can go to Active Directory and manage our group membership there, and that will be reflected when ICE is checking on those AD group memberships. Now pretty much everybody belongs to the domain users group inside of Active Directory. Just for grins, let's create a brand new group inside of Active Directory. So here in Active Directory, I'll log in again. We would click on the icon for Server Manager if it wasn't already up. We go to Tools. From the drop-down, select Active Directory Users and Computers, because that's where we'd go to create a group in Active Directory. And in the users container, we'll right click. And from the drop down menu, we'll select new. And let's go ahead and create a brand new group. And let's call it AD Group ICE. That way when we see it, we'll know, hey, that's our custom group that we created inside of Active Directory. And we'll click on OK. And in fact, let's also take IT Bob. We'll go to IT Bob for a moment. And go to member of. And let's add him as a member of AD Group ICE. So I'm going to just type in AD, click on Check Names, and there's our group starting with AD, and click OK. And OK again. And now IT Bob is a member of administrators, domain users, and AD Group ICE. And we'll click on OK. So with that group created, let's go back to our ICE interface. And that same location for groups for our Active Directory, we'll use the drop down. We'll say, please select groups from directory. We'll click on Retrieve Groups. And there's our group right there, AD Group-ICE. In fact, what we also could have done is we could have filtered on AD asterisk and got a smaller list as a result. However this works, we'll click on that group and click on OK. And now we have these two different groups that are Active Directory groups that we can use as part of our authorization for individuals as they authenticate to get access to the network. Now, before we leave this screen, there's probably one other thing that we really want to do, and that is right here. Click on Save Configuration. Otherwise, we'll be wondering why those groups don't show up when we attempt to start using them. We need to make sure we click on Save Configuration to save it. And after saving something, I always like to go back just to verify that they are indeed really there. That looks fantastic. So as a verification, let's do the following. Bob currently can ping, I believe, 8.8.8.8, which is one of Google's DNS servers. We'll try that real quick. We'll do a ping of 8.8.8.8, and sure enough, ping is no problem. So the packet is going from Bob's PC into switch port gig 0/7 on the switch, and then somewhere in the network there's a router function. It may be happening in the switch as well that leads off to the internet, and that traffic is successfully making it out, and the reply traffic is coming back in. That's great. To demonstrate the power of authorizing a port and giving special permissions, what I'd like to do as a demonstration is let's, on this port gig 0/7, let's create an access control list that says no, like the Nancy Reagan policy. just say no. We're not going to allow any ICMP traffic destined to 8.8.8.8, and we'll apply it inbound on that port that Bob's connected to. And of course, in that access control list, we'll say permit everything else so that he's able to go ahead and use everything except for ping to that destination address. Now, the reason we're putting this access control list there is because once we put some restrictions in locally on that port, to simulate what a limited port could do, and an access list could deny virtually everything. We could then have 802.1x run, Bob get authorized, and then have a policy pushed down to that port that gives Bob special superpowers, like, hey, go ahead and permit traffic anywhere. That would override the local access control list that is sitting on that port. The other thing we could do with authorization is we could put that port into, for example, VLAN 10 or VLAN 20 or VLAN 30 or even VLAN 1, depending on what port we wanted Bob to be a part of. So let's start off on the switch. And on the switch, we're going to go into configuration mode and create an access control list called sample-ACL. It'll have two entries. The first one will deny ICMP from anywhere going to the destination of 8.8.8.8, and the second entry will permit everything else, just as a demonstration, and then we'll apply that access list inbound on gig 0/7 by going into interface gig 07 and saying IP access group, the name of our access control list, in. Now, as a result of that, let's test and see whether or not Bob has the ability to ping 8.8.8.8. So we'll hit the up arrow key again, and we'll try that ping now. And it's like crickets. Yep, it's timing out because it's being killed right at the port, gig 0/7. It's not allowing ICMP packets, which is what ping uses, to go to the destination of 8.8.8.8. So if we ping, for example, google.com, which is a different IP address, that ping works, which implies DNS is working and ICMP is working except to the destination of 8.8.8.8. So what I'd like you to imagine with me is that we could create some pretty comprehensive default access control list and apply it to all of our access ports, so that anyone who is not authenticated could do very, very little. Maybe they could do a little bit of DHCP, maybe they could do a little DNS, maybe a little group policy, maybe a little Active Directory authentication. But as far as any transit traffic where they're trying to get to resources or access servers, we could pretty much cut that off for any unauthorized ports. And then once the user authenticates, we could push down to that port where the user authenticated downloadable access control lists, which allow greater flexibility, greater access, as well as other parameters such as which VLAN this port should now be a member of and so forth. So to set this up in ICE, let's go ahead and bring up the ICE interface. And the first thing I'd like to share with you is where we could go to take a look at the existing downloadable ACLs and where we would also go to create downloadable custom ACLs if we wanted to create them. And to get to the downloadable access control list, we're going to go to Policy. From the Policy drop-down menu under Policy Elements, we have the option of Result. And that's where we're going to go to modify the downloadable ACLs as well as authorization profiles that we can use for authorized ports. So we'll click on Results. On the left-hand side, our second option down is Authorization. I'm going to use the arrow to go ahead and expand that. We have Authorization Profiles. We'll go to that in just a moment. But for right now, I want to share with you the downloadable access control list. There's two of them by default, and they are called Deny All Traffic and Permit All Traffic. And effectively, the Deny All Traffic says deny IP any. And the Permit All Traffic says permit IP any. And if we wanted to create a custom downloadable ACL, we could click on the Add button, and we'll call this our ACL. And then we simply put in our entries as if we're editing an extended named access control list. So if we needed like 10 specific downloadable access control lists that we could associate with certain users or certain groups, here's how we'd go ahead and create them. For us, we don't need to create a brand new one because we've got these two access control lists deny all, and permit all, and the permit all will be perfect in our situation. The second thing that you and I get to do is to create an authorization profile. And to do that, it's in this same location. So we went to Policy, Policy Elements, Results. Here's our downloadable ACLs, and we're now going to take a look at Authorization Profiles. This is like the good news section. Hey, congratulations, you've authenticated and now you're authorized. Here's what you get. So if we click on Authorization Profiles and we expand it, it's got a whole bunch that are pre-built, including this one, which is called Permit Access. And previously, when we went to Operations and we looked at Authentications, if we looked at the details, we saw that every time we had an authorized port. And the permit access is very much what it sounds like. The user's been authenticated. The authorization profile that's associated with it by default is permit access, which gives that user access to the network. However, we can create our own customized authorization profile by simply clicking on the add icon. And let's go ahead and name it our AUTHOR profile, just like that. And that way when we see it, we'll know, hey, that's the one that we created, you and I. In the description, I'm going to copy paste the same name. And then the access type, based on this authorization profile, we can say access accept or access reject. In our case, we definitely want to have access accept. And now, my friend, we can specify additional details for an authorized port that's using this authorization profile. For example, this downloadable ACL name, we click that checkbox, and then we can go ahead from the drop-down and select the downloadable ACL that we want to apply to that port that's authorized. So if we had 5 or 6 downloadable ACLs that we created, they would all show here in the drop-down list. So in our case, let's select Permit All Traffic, which is an access control list that's going to indicate Permit IP any. And this downloadable access control list is going to take precedence over an access list that's currently on the interface. Anything that is denied or permitted explicitly in this downloadable ACL, that's what's going to happen. We can also assign that port that's been authorized to a specific VLAN. So in this case, let's go ahead and assign VLAN number 1. So if I was putting this port into VLAN 10 or VLAN 20 based on this authorization profile, that number would go right here. Now it just so happens that I'm going to use VLAN 1, and that's because I'm currently RDP'd over to Bob's PC, and I want to make sure we can maintain that connectivity, so I'm going to leave him in the same VLAN. And if we scroll down, we have a boatload of additional options that we can associate with this authorization profile. So for our demonstration, we're going to download an access control list called Permit All Traffic, and we're going to assign a VLAN policy to the port. And to save this, we need to go down to the bottom and click on Submit. And there it is right there. It's sorted alphabetically. And that's our authorization profile. Now the next question we might ask is, okay, well, how do we actually use this authorization profile that we just created? And the answer is, we're going to play a big if-then statement. When a computer connects and when they authenticate, if these conditions match up, then we want to apply this authorization profile that we just created. Now to do that, we're going to go ahead and go back to the Policy drop-down menu. And from this Policy drop-down menu, we're going to go to this link called Authorization. So currently, we're in the Results section. That's where we defined our authorization profiles. That's where we could define and create brand new access control lists. And then to apply it, we're going to use this link here, which is where we create the if-then conditional statement of whether or not to apply the authorization profile. So by clicking on Authorization, here we have our default rules, and these are processed top to bottom. And these rule names all come standard with ICE. I did not create any one of these. It's just how it came out of the box once we installed ICE. So the wireless blacklist is looking to find if there's a blacklist and wireless access. Then that would be a match, and then this profile, this authorization profile would be implemented. If that doesn't match, The next question is it an IP phone? And if so, it's going to have the IP phone's authorization profile. If that doesn't match, you would then check if it's a non-Cisco profiled phone. And if that matches, it gets this authorization profile. And then what we've been doing for every authentication that you and I have done that's been successful, we've been defaulting to the default, which is using the default authorization profile called permit access. So what I think would be fun to do, because we haven't yet talked about setting up profiling to identify what type of devices is connecting. That's coming up in this course. But for now, let's go ahead and insert a new rule right before the default. We'll put it right here. Now, to insert a new rule right there, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this drop down arrow and we're going to tell it that we want to create a new rule just above this default rule that's currently in place. So to do that, we'll click on the drop down arrow, we'll select insert new rule above, and then we simply name it. Let's call this user and PC authenticated. Now the title, of course the title itself is just a label. It doesn't really mean too much. It's really what's in the conditional statements regarding this rule. So what we could do here in the conditions is we could make the conditions say if the user is a member of Active Directory Group X and if the computer is successfully authenticated, then we'll go ahead and apply the authorization profile that we just created. So to set up the first condition, we're going to click on this little plus symbol in the conditions section, and we're going to choose this option right here, create a new condition, and we're going to choose the advanced option because it gives us more choices. So we'll click on create new condition, and you know what we could do? We could go ahead and search for the EAP chaining if it's a success. So if we click on this little icon right here, which is the select attribute option, we could select from this list network access. That's going to expand the details regarding network access. There should be an option here regarding EAP chaining. Let's go ahead and scroll down, see if we can find it. There we go. EAP chaining result. So let's go ahead and select that. And then regarding the result, we're looking for a success in the EAP chaining, which implies the user and the machine have both been authenticated. So we'll click on this arrow here to take a look at our options. And sure enough, right there, user and machine both succeeded. So we're going to choose this option right here. So our first condition is this. If the results of EAP chaining are successful for both the user and the computer, that's a 2 big thumbs up. That's a match. However, let's you and I kick this up even a notch further. Because we have access to group membership in Active Directory, we could make another condition that says, oh, and also if the user that authenticated is a member of this group, to make it conditional. Now to do that, to add another condition to this rule, we'd go over here to this gear on the right hand side, click on it, and from the drop down we're going to select add attribute / value. And you'll notice what that did, it actually put another condition here. And the operator here by default is and, implying that both of these conditions have to match for this rule to be matched. The other option we have here, of course, is or. But because we want them all to have to match, I'm going to go ahead and leave that as an and. So if we use this option here to take a look at the attributes for our second condition as part of this rule, you'll notice here is our AD1. Of course, that's representing our Active Directory. If we click on that, it'll show us the details regarding Active Directory. And here we can specify external groups. So this is just a matter of perspective. This is from ICE's perspective. The external authentication source is AD1. And now we're focusing on the attribute of groups as part of AD1. For the operator, we can go ahead and say equals, not equals, starts with, not starts with. Let's go for equals, and let's say the user has to be a member of a specific group. And right here are those 2 groups that we brought in earlier in this video. So let's say that the user has to be a member of AD Group ICE, because we know that IT Bob is a member of that group, because we put him in that group when we made that group in Active Directory. So we'll select that group. So if we have the EAP chaining is a success for user and machine, and if the user is a member of that group, then we get to specify which authorization profile will be assigned to that port that the user is coming in on. To specify the authorization profile that we created for the matching of this rule, we'd click on the plus symbol in the permissions column. We'd expand the list. We'd go up to standard. And from here, check it out. There's our authorization profile, which will push down the dynamic access control list of permit IP any. It'll also push down the VLAN policy, indicating that that port should be in VLAN 1. So we'll select our authorization profile. And now if we're done creating that rule, we're going to do two things. We're going to click on Done over here on the right-hand side. And then equally important, we're going to click on the Save button right over here to make sure it's saved. And there's a beautiful summary of our rule. If the EAP chaining result is successful for both the user and the computer, and the user is a member of that group called AD group-ICE, then this authorization profile is going to be implemented on that port where the user is getting access into the network. Now, of course, the last step is to test this and see if it works. Now, previously, Bob could not ping out to 8.8.8.8. So if we use the up arrow a few times and try that again, that is still unsuccessful. And that's because we haven't re-authenticated the port yet. So let's go back to the switch. And on the switch, let's also use the up arrow key a few times. And we'll force that port to re-authenticate with the .1x re-authenticate interface gig 0/7. Now that the re-authentication has been done, what should have happened is the policy should be pushed down, including the VLAN assignment and the permit IP any, which should now allow Bob to go ahead and ping to 8.8.8.8. We can verify that real quick a couple of ways. Number one, we can go back to Bob's machine, hit the up arrow key, press enter, and the pings work. That's one good indicator. And we could go back to the switch and do a show authentication sessions for interface gig 0/7. That will also show us the details. So back at the switch, if we use the command show authentication sessions for interface gig 0/7, we're going to have some new detail because it was successful regarding the authorization of that port. So here's the new pieces. Here's our VLAN policy. It assigned it VLAN 1 specifically. That came because of the authorization profile we created. And also take a look, this access control list ACL has been downloaded and applied to this port. And it's that access control list that is permitting Bob's traffic, his ping specifically, out to 8.8.8.8. At the ICE server, if we go to Operations and Authentications, and let me go ahead and expand this column just a little bit so we can read it better. I'd like you to notice some magic that happened. The downloadable ACL was pushed from the ICE server down to the switch so the switch could apply it to port gig 0/7. Also, over here in the authorization profiles, it shows us which authorization profile was being used because of our if-then statement, because the conditions matched for a successful user and computer. As part of the EAP chaining was successful and the group membership succeeded. That is the reason that this authorization profile was selected and implemented on that port. And this opens up a whole nother world of opportunity because we could set up specific rules where the host authenticated successfully. So that would be a situation where the PC or the host, the computer itself, was successfully authenticated because it's part of the domain, but the user has not yet logged on. So we could have separate rules just for that and separate downloadable access control lists and permissions based on that event happening. In this video, we've taken a look at how we can use rules to implement authorization profiles on a set of conditions. In our example, it was based on whether or not the computer and Bob himself were both successfully authenticated against Active Directory, and in addition, if Bob was a member of a group inside of Active Directory. And based on that success, the policy pushed down to this port was a VLAN policy, telling the switch exactly which VLAN that port should be in. And secondly, pushing down an access control list, a downloadable access control list, to that port to give Bob further access into the network. I have had a great time in this video. I would strongly recommend you practice in a test environment the techniques and the methods that we've done together in this video. And if you have an expert in Microsoft Active Directory available at your company or you're associated with that person, you might want to reach out to help with any Microsoft related aspects, such as the Active Directory or the DNS or certificate services that are Microsoft related. And that'll give you the opportunity to focus on the ICE and the authorization aspects as we focus on the Cisco implementation of 802.1x authentication using ICE. I have had a great time in this video. I'm so glad you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.